Ladies and gentlemen, it is down to 4, and JR and I are recording an emergency podcast episode trying to get you guys the content that we want to give you guys before the actual championship series of the eMLB take place, which will be by the time you guys are seeing this tonight on the Fluffy Kitty Ninja Network on their Twitch channel. But after a very exciting group of division series, we now have the final four teams. We have on the American League side, the Houston Astros taking on the Cleveland Indians. And on the National League side, we have the San Diego Padres taking on the Chicago Cubs. JR, what are your thoughts so far about the division series that we just finished watching? Two exciting game fives in those series with two out of the four. Everyone won at least one game. There were no sweeps, right?
No, yeah, no sweeps. Yeah.
Yeah, that was already exciting enough as it is. So what were your thoughts during those series?
Yeah, it's great to be back here chatting with you on it. I think, we saw in those series kind of what we had seen all season long, and that, there's definitely some dominant teams in this league, but at the same time, you can see just about anything happening once you get to the postseason. And there's just, a lot of young talent in this league that really stepped up. And it's kind of fun to see that, you still do have some of those big time teams remaining, kind of the best of the best, especially in the National League. But really cool to see Cleveland kind of pull it out in that game 5 against the Orioles and stay alive. They've got, real magic season happening there. Maybe I mentioned in the article I wrote, they're probably arriving a season or two earlier than probably even, Sadie or the GM expected. But there's a lot of young talent on that Cleveland team, and that's been a real great story.
Yeah, kudos to Sadier and the Indians, and also kudos to the Orioles GM Brendan for actually on the last episode of the Here's Why You're Wrong Insider Crossover. He predicted that it would either be an Orioles sweep or the Indians would take it in 5. And lo and behold, the Indians took it in 5. So kudos to Brendan for actually predicting his own demise there.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to realize it was going to go one of two ways, which is probably fair to think about it that way.
But also on the other side, kudos to the Houston Astros because they had the best record in the American League, and their prize for doing so is getting the matchup against the other 100-win team in the Los Angeles Angels because they ended up on the wild card side, matched up with the number 1 seed, and they took care of business. They won in 4 games. You could argue that they had the harder matchup to face than if they would have faced the Orioles or the Indians, but they came out and took care of business, got the win in the series in 4 games, did not allow it to go to a game 5 where anything could have happened, as we saw with 2 of the 4 series that happened. So kudos to the Astros, the number 1 seed, moving on to the championship series, facing off against these Indians. So what are your thoughts going into this American League Championship Series?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, you don't often see in the division series round 2 100-plus win teams matching up there. But, Houston, they kind of were the team that we've seen all season long, a team that really put some offense out there. Yordan Alvarez was the division series MVP for them. He had 11 RBIs in 4 games, which is pretty incredible.
That's almost 3 per game.
Yeah, so he really led the way, just as he's kind of had that resurgent season all year long. So that part wasn't a surprise. And then they had really just enough pitching on their end too. I mean, they've got maybe not necessarily a particular ace starter that you would say, but man, they have a deep bullpen, and pretty much all their starters are reliable. So just that balance of that team is going to really be tough for Cleveland to overcome as they head into there, especially since, again, their series going game 5, they had to burn Martin Bradford for 2 starts there. He had to make his game 5 start. So you have to figure, he's probably not making his first start in the ALCS until game 3, probably depending on how how the series works out. So, if they could have wrapped that up in 4 and been able to throw him out there game 1, potentially, one or two other starts there would have helped them out. But I think it still could be a tight series. Cleveland got a big division series out of John Cotton, the rookie. He was really huge in there. It is a shame that they're going to be without Forrest Hydert, their young starting catcher, who got injured in that series. So that's definitely a big loss for them as they head into it. So definitely puts them even more behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, you have to think if you're the Astros, you feel like you've taken out your biggest hurdle in getting to the World Series and having to get by your division rival, a team that knows you really well, a team that also won 100 games alongside you in Los Angeles. And you have to think that they're feeling pretty good going into this championship series against an Indians team that, I mean, just looking at the matchup, you have to think that Astros have the definite edge. They're playing that they've already played a quote unquote better team in the Angels, but that leaves the danger of underestimating a team. And a lot of people have been underestimating the Indians to this point, and they're here in the American League Championship Series. And at the beginning of the year, none of us predicted the Indians to make the playoffs, much less the American League Championship Series. All of us were thinking it was going to be Detroit coming out of the Central, and maybe not even maybe Minnesota. You were talking about Minnesota at the beginning of the year, and they
Yeah.
looked pretty good to start the season, and then just took a nosedive. But none of us talked about the Indians being here, and here they are in the American League Championship Series. You got to give them the respect that they deserve.
Yeah, and let's be honest about it too. I mean, they were able to win that 5-game division series, getting absolutely nothing from Aaron Judge, who was
Yeah,
such a
he
big.
went hitless the entire
Yeah,
time,
he was
right?
0 for 21 in the 5 games. I mean, they got absolutely zero from, well, less than zero really, if you want to go by WAR. um, but so for them to advance in a hard fought 5-game series without really their number one offensive threat and their MVP from the season doing anything, you have to think he's due for something in this
You would
ALCS.
you would hope so, or else they're going to have to rely on Cotton and Lindor like they did in this series. Also, Bobby Gilliam had a really good series too, batting 467 with a home run and 5 RBIs. Um, but yeah, like that. I said it in the chat during the stream today while the game was still going on, and I said if you had told me that Judge was 0 for 19, I would not believe that you would be in a game 5 with the Indians. I would have thought the
Yeah.
Orioles would have already wrapped it up because Judge is such a key part of their lineup. But people stepped up around him and got through the runs. Their pitching actually. Let's talk about their pitching. Their pitching did really well this series. They only the worst that they allowed were 4 runs in the game 4 loss. It looks
Yeah.
like. Oh no, the two losses they had, they both allowed 4 runs. The other games that they won, they allowed less than 4. So you have to give kudos to the pitching to limit the Orioles offense.
Yeah, and especially with it being young pitching. We mentioned
Yeah.
Bradford, who obviously, rookie of the year, strong contender there. In other years he'd probably be a runaway if not for some of the guys that he's competing with there. But on top of that, you had Ryan Tecker come in, throw 6 innings, 1 run baseball in a crucial spot. Whip Sentner, came over from Pittsburgh earlier in the year, and he's pitched well, and he pitched well in that series. For young guys with their first taste of the postseason, it was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, not only that, Martin Bradford, 13 innings, 0 earned runs with 16 strikeouts. That is pretty dominant stuff. That was what, honestly, that was what Ethan Knight was last year for the Orioles during their playoff run. That was the impact that they had, and it looks like the momentum shifted to the side of the Indians to get that dominant pitching performance out of Bradford. Because that's another thing that Brendan mentioned is that they were hoping that they get the old Ethan Knight back from last year, not the Ethan Knight that had pitched this year, and it didn't happen that way. Bradford was absolutely dominant without allowing a run in 13 innings and 2 starts. So kudos to the Indians pitching staff, which is I think was the key for them to winning that series.
Yeah,
Now,
definitely.
but as you mentioned, because they had to use Bradford twice, including in the game 5, how's that pitching going to hold up against the juggernaut of the Astros lineup? I don't think it's going to hold up as well. No offense to the Indians, but you're talking Orioles, Astros. No offense to the Orioles, but the Astros, let's just be real. They were the second best lineup in the league after the Cubs in terms of offensive production.
Yeah, it's a lineup you can't count on shutting down. You really just have to try and limit, what you give up to them. You can't give them extra base runners with walks and things like that and errors. And just, frankly, they're going to need a bigger offensive performance than they got in that Baltimore series because,
Yep.
again, say you have a Bradford go out and goes 6 innings and gives up 2 or 3 runs. I mean, that you would still take that. I mean, that would be still
Absolutely
a great performance against that team, but that means your offense has to step up. And that Houston staff is pretty tough too.
And to that point, I'm going to touch on this real quick. We'll go more in depth in a minute, but the game 5 with the Phillies and the Cubs, that's what you saw in that game is that the Phillies were limiting the Cubs in their offensive their really potent lineup, but their offense didn't give them enough to win in the end. And it was a thrilling 14-inning game, and it ended up at a 2-1 final, which you hold the Cubs to 2 runs, and
you have to win that game.
You have to win that game because that doesn't happen very often. And actually, they did it a couple times that series, if I'm not mistaken. They did it. They held them to 1 run in game 2. They shut them out in game 3.
Yeah,
but they held them to 2 runs in game 5, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah, the pitching was not the reason they lost that series. That's for sure.
It was their offense. Let's put it this way. They used up pretty much all of their offense in game 1 when they lost 13-9.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't find the swing after that. But sorry, kind of getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the American League Championship Series. What is your prediction for this series?
We've kind of said it a little bit, but I just have a hard time, seeing the Indians being able to pull this off completely. I think they have the talent, to stand with them a little bit because you do have the potential of an Aaron Judge who can go out there and go bombs away in a stretch and get hot and really carry a team. Plus the Lindor factor and again, John Cotton coming off a great division series. So they have some firepower there. Mm-hmm. And they have the pitching staff that can compete pretty well from the starting end. But this Houston club is just so complete that, they may not win the World Series. But man, I'm going to have a hard time, picking somebody to beat them at this point. I would probably lean toward, saying that Houston wins this in 6 games. I think Cleveland, still finds a way to get a couple wins in there with their pitching staff. But I see Houston marching on.
I'm going to say I agree with all the takes that you said. I don't think I really have anything else to add other than my specific prediction. And I say the Astros win in 5, and the 1 game is a Martin Bradford shutout for the Indians. Just to put that cherry on top on a dominant Bradford performance. I want to see him get through the entire playoffs until the Indians are done without him allowing a single run. I would just love that. It's a great story so far. I want to see him continue that. To continue that against the Houston lineup would just be absolutely fantastic. So I want to see Bradford go another 6-7 innings of shutout baseball. They may not even win that game, because maybe the bullpen gives up some runs in the end. But I want to see Bradford get through the playoffs without allowing a single earned run.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, the great thing for Cleveland is they're in that classic situation of they're playing with house money at this point. Nobody outside of the 614 is going to expect them. Or maybe it's not the 614. I can't remember what the area code is up there, but either way,
no.
nobody outside of the land is going to expect them to make it to the World Series and topple the Astros. So they can play free and easy and just go out and play ball.
Yeah, and just a quick plug for our universe. Martin Bradford, that we keep talking about, the ace of the Indian staff, is a community creative player. Shout out Extreme for his creative player in this universe. If you want to get in and create a player in this universe and potentially become the ace of a staff or the cleanup hitter in a potent lineup, make sure to tune in to the Twitch streams, join our Discord, and you may be able to create your own player to make your mark on this league. As honestly, it's going to get to a point where there's more community creative players than non-community creative players, and I'm all for it. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, bring
So,
on the talent, baby.
absolutely. All right, so we're both saying Astros in. I said in 5. You say in 6. I don't. I think the Indians are going to be able to scrap together 1 or 2 wins. I don't think it's going to be a sweep because I think they have some momentum, but it's just Astros. It's just the Astros. They've been at the top of the league all season. There's no reason to think they're going to stop now, honestly.
I know Ben is probably dying for us to pick against his team, but sorry, Ben, we can't do
Give him the kiss of death. All right, National League side. As we kind of touched on earlier, the Cubs overtook the Phillies in a thrilling Game 5 that went 14 innings. We've had a bunch of extra inning exciting games. As the first one that was on the stream was my Cardinals against the Dodgers in the Game 163 that went extras. And then this one, Game 5, winner take all. They went 14 innings and only scored a total of 3 runs as the Cubs took down the Phillies in the bottom of the 14th on an attempted fielder's choice, try to cut him down at the plate on a runner at third, ground ball in the infield, but the throw was not in time. And the Cubs are going to go up against the San Diego Padres, the top team from the National League side in terms of record this year. And this, honestly, I think this is going to be a much, well, I don't want to say better series, but I think it's going to be a more closely matched series than the American League side. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's one of those where, to your point, it's a series that you could see. There's so much star power on both of these teams. They're loaded with superstars, on both sides, and I think it's going to be really entertaining to kind of see, whose stars show up the most.
Mm.
Everybody does love to see when somebody kind of comes out of nowhere to be a hero in a game or a hero in a series. But really, you love to see the stars shine the brightest on the biggest stage, and I think we're going to see that in this series.
Absolutely. And you have to think that going into the series against the Padres, the Cubs might be a little bit worried because they started out great with a 13-run explosion in Game 1 against the Phillies. But ever since that first game, their offense has been kind of not the same explosive offense that we've come to expect from the Cubs. They got over after their 13-run first game. The next 2 games, they scored a total of 1 run. And then they did bounce back and win the next 2 games 5-2 and 2-1. But if you take out that first game of the series, they scored a total of 7 runs over 4 games, which is definitely not the pace that offense is used to. And
No.
you're going to be going up against a San Diego team that had one of the best pitching staffs in the National League in terms of runs allowed. If not, I think they might have been the best, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they had the top ERA overall and the best bullpen ERA in the National League as well.
Yeah, so I mean, no discredit to the Phillies pitching staff. I feel like the pitching was actually one of the Phillies' strengths this year with like the way that the Phillies designed their pitching staff around their good infield defense to like get those ground balls, get outs, that kind of. The Phillies did a fantastic job of doing that. But in terms of just pure domination, the Padres were the first in the National League in runs allowed, in the fewest runs allowed. And if your offense that has been carrying you this far in the Cubs is struggling against the Phillies, how much more so do you think it might struggle against the Padres?
Right, because even though there's definitely some talented pitchers on that Phillies team, you wouldn't
Absolutely.
necessarily regard that as one of the better pitching staffs in the league. You know,
It's a great combination of pitching to their defense,
right,
but
right.
the pitching itself isn't dominant like the Padres pitching has been.
Yeah, and the Padres are a little bit similar to that in a way. I mean, if you take a look, it's not like they have a bunch of guys who go out there and strike out 10 batters. They really rely on not walking guys. They led the NL in the fewest walks from their pitching staff, and to your point, relying on a lot of great defense, whether it's from Asher Kim in the infield or Una Kim in the outfield. I mean, they have some people who cover a lot of ground, which obviously in Petco Park comes in handy, particularly in the outfield.
Yeah.
To use your park to your advantage. But Bob Dowd, led the NL and ERA this year. Perhaps the leading Cy Young candidate in the National League. Mackenzie Gore, that's a really good 1-2 punch there. And then I really like Connor Siebold. He probably had the best start of all of them in the division series. He had a 6-inning, 1-run outing as part of that series there against the Giants. So, there's definitely some talent there and a pretty deep bullpen to where they probably have an even better shot at limiting that Cubs offense than you would have thought the Phillies had.
Absolutely. I think it's still going to be a very competitive series because we know with the Cubs offense, they could find it in an instant
Oh
and
yeah.
just all of a sudden just explode. So I feel like it's funny. I feel like it might go the same way in this series where the Cubs just get out to a real hot start, but then the Padres settle in and cool off the bats of the Cubs. The Padres have what the Phillies didn't have in the division series, and I think the Padres will have the offense to take advantage of the Chicago Cubs bats cooling down because they have a much more potent lineup when you look at the numbers anyway than the Phillies did in the divisional round.
Yeah, and we've said it on multiple podcasts before this year, and whether there were ones that I was on or I was not on, and that the Cubs pitching staff just there isn't anything about that scares you. And they've had some guys pitch well. Again, in this division series, part of the reason they won was because their pitching staff came through, and when their offense didn't produce, their pitching staff was able to help them out. So, they definitely showed they could hold that Phillies offense down, but this Padres offense is much more different than that Phillies offense.
Yeah, you got players like Steve Randolph who only gave up 1 run in, I believe, 2 starts, which was the Harper home run, which is the only run the Phillies got in Game 5. You have who else? Brice Alston, who actually I hadn't heard of that name before, pitched 6 innings in this series and had 11 strikeouts and didn't give up a run. And
yeah, Bill
pitched,
Sullivan, he had a really good start for them. I think he had nearly 6 shutout innings in his start. Guys that the names don't stick out to you, but they came through for the most part for them in this series.
Yeah. However, I will say the thing that I think is the problem with the Cubs at the beginning of the season, I thought it was the pitching, but the more I saw the season go on, I saw it was leaning more towards their defense not helping their pitching as opposed to the pitching themselves. Now, if they get a better defense, I still wouldn't say the Cubs have some of the best pitching in the league, but it's definitely better than we gave them credit for at the beginning of the season. I am worried that the Cubs defense might cost them a game in this series, and that might not be a game that they would be able to recover from. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into my prediction. I think the Padres will take this in 6. I do think the Cubs they'll have their one breakout offensive game where they score double-digit runs, but I also think that there's going to be a game where their defense fails them and they lose a 1 or 2 run game because of some defensive miscue, and that's going to swing the momentum onto the side of the Padres.
Yeah, and I think what we have to remember, and it always sounds like in a case like this, we're talking a lot about the negative, and that's just because you have two teams that are both so good
Oh yeah,
that you
absolutely.
you have to find out what those small differences are. That when you're talking about two great teams, the smallest of negative is going to stick out.
Yeah,
Um,
these were the top two teams in the National League in terms of record this season. So it's not like we're
yeah,
saying they're bad. It's just saying
right. I mean,
when you're
you know,
comparing the two best teams in the league, you got to find something that's wrong.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, Jake's put together, a really incredible lineup here with the Cubs, and they've done a good job all season long of outscoring people,
Yeah.
especially once they really got into a groove there mid-season, and you'd be hard pressed to find any deeper lineup out there. Even with some of the ones we've talked about with the Padres themselves and the Astros out there.
So
Um,
let me just point this out real quick as you're talking about like the lineup that Jake in Chicago's put together. They were the only team in the entire league to surpass 900 runs scored. They scored 944 runs this season, about 50 runs more than the Boston Red Sox at 893, which was the second highest scoring team. And then after that, you had the three teams that we've talked about already in Houston Astros, San Diego Padres, and Los Angeles Angels at 891, 890, and 885. But the Cubs were more than 50 runs ahead of all of those teams. So that's how dominant their offense was. But the reason why they don't have the best record in the league is because their pitching slash defense still gave up a few more runs. Because if you switch it to the other side and talk about um, runs allowed, let me pull that up real quick. The Astros, Padres, and Giants and Cardinals were the top four teams in terms of runs allowed, and the Cubs are at the about the middle of the pack with 763 runs allowed, whereas these other teams we were talking about, Cardinals were at 658, Giants 627, Padres 613, and Astros 600.
Yeah, and so they ranked eighth in the NL in runs allowed, and third in home runs allowed, but 11th in walks allowed. So what does that tell you? It tells you that they're putting too many men on base, whether it's by walk or allowing hits from solid hits or poor defense.
Yeah,
It's not a matter of them just giving up a whole bunch of home runs because they're pretty near the top of the league in
and
terms of
limiting the long ball.
and limiting the long ball. So it's all of those other hits, all of those base runners that pile up, and
You got to keep people off the base pads.
absolutely, yeah. You can't allow that many runners and not expect it to come back and bite you. Um,
And when you're going up a team against a team like the Padres, who were second in the National League in on base percentage, probably behind the Cubs, I would assume, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken. Hold on, let me double check that.
yeah,
Yeah, the
you're right.
Cubs were first, so they're facing the second team in the National League, just behind themselves in terms of on base percentage. And you're already a pitching staff that has a problem keeping people off base. That's a little worrisome.
Yeah, and by the same token, like we already talked about, the Padres are really good at limiting the freebies and limiting the base runners from their
Yes.
pitching side. So for me, I, I definitely see the Padres taking this. It might sound surprising. I think it's probably going to be 5 games. I
Oh,
think it'll be.
oh, okay.
I say it's going to be 5 games, but I think they're going to be five tightly packed games and very competitive games. It's just a
That's
matter
true.
of, that I think San Diego is going to be able to come on out on top. I mean, I think they'll be really close, really back and forth, where it'll be a really competitive series, even though in my mind it could end in 5 games for the Padres. But Fernando Tatis, had a blistering 4 games there in the division series. Was the division series MVP. The Kims, Framil Reyes. I mean, I just again kind of like with the Astros, I just have a hard time picking a team like the Cubs who has some flaws, even with their 100 wins, to take out the Padres at this point.
Yeah, but then on the other side, I'm just now looking at the lineup of the Cubs. They had four players eclipse 100 RBIs. They had 4 players have a minimum of 37 home runs. 3 of those players had 40 plus. And it's just like, oh man, how are you going to limit that? But if any team were to do that in the National League, I believe it would be it would have been either the Padres or the Giants coming out of that. I would have believed like those were the 2 teams that could limit the Cubs. Now the Phillies did a pretty darn good job after game 1 of limiting them, and you have to think that gives the Padres pitchers confidence going into this one, seeing what the Phillies had done, saying, okay, they were able to limit them. They just didn't have the offense. We've got the offense on our side that can overcome this. Let's go out there and do what the Phillies just did to them pitching wise. Try to contain them, like that cliche phrase. You can only hope to contain them. Contain them as best as you can. Keep them under 6 runs. I think would be what your goal is in a game. But you have the offense to take advantage of that.
Right. Yeah, that's where for me I just feel like there's too much balance on that San Diego team from both the pitching, the hitting, and the defensive side for Chicago to overcome it.
Now, I would not be surprised if Chicago did overcome it because they have such firepower. They have far and away the highest powered offense in the league. So I would not be surprised if they came out there and just started swinging really hot bats and just started torching the Padres pitching because they have the potential to do so. I just think of the teams that are in the playoffs, I thought the Padres and the Giants were the 2 teams that had the best chance of shutting down the Cubs lineup based on their pitching staffs.
I would say, from my standpoint, I would actually be more surprised if the Cubs won than the Indians.
Really? Ooh, that's spicy because I don't think so. I don't agree with you. Here's no, wait, wrong show. Sorry.
Wrong
No, I think the Cubs have a better chance, and it shows in our predictions because I predicted 5 games for the Astros Indians. You predicted 6 for that, and then it was vice versa for this series, where I thought the Cubs Padres would go 6, and you thought they'd go 5. So that's actually interesting take. Is there a specific reason why? Is it because the Padres are that much are better, you'd say, than the Astros, or is it because of the matchups?
I think it's more matchups. You know, for me, I think, you know, if you take a look at the American League series, I can see a scenario where Cleveland's pitching outperforms Houston's pitching, and their offense, you know, keeps it fairly even. If you have a hot stretch by Aaron Judge, you have, you know, John Cotton stays hot. You have Don, you know, there's some guys on that Cleveland team that can really hit and really mash, to where if their pitching staff shows up big time and really shows out against the Astros, I could definitely see them winning that series and outperforming them just based on the matchups. Whereas for me, with the San Diego Chicago matchup, I think it's just a really obviously, you know, San Diego's that has the better record, but say San Francisco had won that series and it's San Francisco against Chicago, then I feel like from the Chicago standpoint, you feel so much better because even if the Giants pitching staff kind of shuts their offense down, the Giants offense doesn't scare you at all. And you feel like, you know, your pitching staff can still hold down them enough while your offense does just enough to win. I just don't see, you know, the Cubs offense being able to make up for what I expect the Padres offense to do against their pitching staff.
Well, in my mind, that's kind of what you and I have been talking about all year. Is the Cubs offense enough to overcome the pitching staff and the defense as of late? I think their offense does have that ability to overcome the potential pitching because I think their pitching is performing better than we've given them credit for. And B, their offense is just that explosive. I mean, like I mentioned before, they scored 50 more runs than the second place team in terms of runs scored on the offensive side of the ball. And that team isn't even in the playoffs in the Boston Red Sox. So that's how high powered the offense is. And I think that's been their MO the entire season, is just blow the other teams out so your pitching doesn't have to worry about shutting them down to 1 or 2 runs. Like, it's literally the stark contrast of my team, the Cardinals. My team was limit as much as possible because your offense isn't going to get you 3 or 4 runs. But it worked out better for the Cubs than it did for the Cardinals. They're the one sitting there in the LCS. I'm the one that didn't even make the playoffs. So their offense is built to overcome the deficiencies of the pitching. And so that's why I wouldn't be surprised if the offense does explode in this series, even against a very strong Padres staff. But I think the chances are less likely with having to face the Padres and the Giants than they were against the Phillies, which is why in that Phillies series, you saw the Phillies kind of limit the Cubs in a few of those games. And so I think if this momentum keeps going, the Cubs are going to have a hard time. And that's why I have the Padres winning in 6.
Yeah, it's just for me about matchups in a way. For example, if the Cubs were playing the Astros in the World Series, I would be very tempted to pick the Cubs to win that. I think their matchup with the Astros works a little bit different based on who the Astros have from a pitching side, and for me, it's all about the matchup end.
In terms of TV ratings, wouldn't that be the one that all of the networks would want to see is the Astros Cubs, because that's where you're going to see the most firepower, the 2 top offenses in the league going against each other.
Yeah,
that would be the net. What would be Fox's dream come true is all the offense, because chicks dig the long ball, and that's what we would see in that series. Now, not to discredit the Padres or the Indians, because they have some high-powered offenses of their own. But you're talking about the top 2 offenses in the Astros and the Cubs.
Yeah,
but I think the Padres could be just as explosive. They're just not as extreme. Like they're like 3-4 behind Astros Cubs in terms of offense. So,
right.
Well, any closing thoughts as we wrap up this little short preview episode before the games tonight?
No, I'm very excited, to see where we end up here. I think, you've got 4 teams that were all division winners, 4 teams that, have a lot of exciting players on there, and it'll definitely be interesting to see if we come out of this with any Game 7 matchups. I know neither one of us, predicted in either series to go 7 games, but it would be fun as a viewer to see that happen.
Absolutely. And I will say my prediction from 3 power rankings ago of Astros Padres World Series is still alive, baby. And that's what I picked. That's what I picked here. So I'll feel really smart if that ends up happening. Now, granted, it has nothing. We're not even close to what we predicted at the beginning of the season. We're not going to talk about that. Let's just talk about what we've been talking about in September. No, it's not anywhere on YouTube that you can go back and watch it all. No. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this quick we're calling it an emergency episode because we literally were like, after the stream, I messaged him. I was like, so are you free tonight? Because this is happening tomorrow. So we threw this together real quick for y'all. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope you guys enjoy the championship series stream that will be happening tonight, Thursday, December 29th on Commission's stream, FKN Commission LB on Twitch. So please check that out. Drop a follow, drop a sub, get your community created players up and running. Join the Discord, join the discussion. It's a whole lot of fun. But until next time, where we're going to preview our World Series matchup, we will guys. Wow. It's late, guys. We will see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.